You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. As you may have guessed, we took a week off there, and we're now back with a lot to cover. Furthermore, this is a special show. We have 3 guests, a woman who is a doctor, a woman who is a nurse, a woman who is an expert on the pharmaceutical industry and herself a patient, and I leave it to you to guess what we're all talking about. But to find out, buckle your seatbelts and let's go inside the headlines for this special show. This week, we're going so far inside the headlines that you'll find most of the headlines per se at the end of the program in the Fighting Words segment. That's because April is Parkinson's Disease Month, and each year we do a special program on women and Parkinson's disease and on gender-specific medicine. As many as 1 million Americans live with Parkinson's disease, which is more than the combined number of people diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, muscular dystrophy, and Lou Gehrig's disease. In fact, it ranks only after Alzheimer's as the most common neurological disease. Regular listeners to this program and podcast know that in 2013, I announced on air that I had been diagnosed with Parkinson's, PD for short. I also wrote an article for the Women's Media Center website features section, which you can still access at womensmediacenter.com. In it, I went into personal details, and I also wrote about my shock on discovering that women had been almost totally left out of the research trials so crucial to finding treatments and cures. So what does an activist do? Wring her hands or roll up her sleeves? You're right, definitely the latter. As a writer, I began working with the subject matter in my poetry, and the new poems are part of my new book due out next year, some of which I've read in a TED Talk, and you can find those online at TED.com by putting my name in the search field at TED. As an activist, I began working with the Parkinson's Disease Foundation, PDF for short, to find ways of making women visible on the Parkinson's map. For instance, current numbers indicate that women and men of color are less likely to get the disease, but it's possible that limited access to specialist care may explain the lower reported rates. Furthermore, women present with different symptoms than men, and are listened to by medical professionals less than men, and are misdiagnosed, consequently, more often. Women with PD are more prone to depression and medication-associated dyskinesia, which are uncontrolled motion. We tend to have more difficulty than men with daily activities like walking and getting dressed in later stages of the disease, but we show less cognitive impairment and fewer behavioral problems like wandering about or physical and verbal abuse. Feminists will recognize that this, of course, might also be due to socialization. Women and men have different responses to medication, too, both in dosage and in the meds themselves. Women are 22% less likely than men with PD to see a neurologist, which can significantly affect care. As for caregiving, well, we know that in all societies, women are the vast majority of caregivers, and we are the so-called tent poles holding up the family. So if a man or other family member falls ill, the woman assumes the care of him or them, but if the woman gets sick, the family tends to fracture. And although there are no studies yet specifically about women with PD finding themselves at risk of losing their partner, studies across other disease areas indicate as much as a 6-fold increase in risk for divorce, separation, or abandonment when the affected spouse is the woman. Then, of course, the clinical trials problem. Prior to the 1980s, participants in nearly all research studies were male. Early studies of heart attacks, for instance, used only male populations, assuming that women just very rarely had heart disease. Only because of pressure from the women's health movement, we know today that heart disease is the leading killer of women as well as of men. But again, you see, women presented with different symptoms, and the assumptions were that it was sufficient to study men since women were really just small men with different reproductive systems. Rationales for the inequality included the perceived complexity of recruiting and including women in studies. Apparently, we were so busy raising children that they couldn't disturb us. Also, there was apparently the necessity to protect a woman and her potential fetus from harm from experimental treatments, and thus avoid financial liability for the drug companies. Plus the claim that it was just too difficult to study treatments in light of women's raging hormonal changes. Fortunately, further research, including that done by the Society for Women's Health Research, blew big holes through these excuses, proving that women's inclusion in clinical trials improves the studies. The presence of women helps scientists develop more targeted treatments. We also learned the hard way that leaving women out of research has serious consequences. Without women in clinical studies, scientists have no idea how we might react differently to medications. For example, the FDA recently advised women to cut doses of the sleeping pill Ambien in half because new research shows women metabolize the active ingredient more slowly than men. A recent PD study shows the implications for both sexes. Women benefited from an experimental treatment, Urate, that's U-R-A-T-E, but men didn't, because men have more urate in their bodies naturally. Furthermore, the presence or absence of estrogen seems to make a difference in treatment of PD. Last, there is the illogic that excluding women from research into experimental treatments protects us from possibly dangerous consequence to a potential fetus, which might indeed be a concern for women with early-onset PD, but they constitute 2 to 5% of all people with PD. And this excuse just delays their risk until the drug is already on the market. So it's simply vital to include women in studies and in better care getting. Research on PD includes genetic research and gene therapy, stem cell studies, new drugs, and deep brain stimulation, or DBS, which, frankly, sounds like something that all the GOP presidential candidates need. But we have only begun to do the serious gender-specific research necessary in all disease and treatment, which ultimately benefits men as well as women. We are entering the age of gender-specific medicine. I've been fortunate in working with the Parkinson's Disease Foundation, and we began a national Women and PD initiative launched last autumn, which is now active across the country. You can find out more about all this by going to pdf.org and searching for the Women and PD initiative. You can find out more about gender-specific medicine by going to gendermed.org. And the Society for Women's Health Research can be accessed by going to swhr.org. Last, a personal note. The disease has a long trajectory of 10 to 15 years or more, and seems in my case to be moving fairly slowly. Although there's yet no cure, the advances in treatment are impressive, and so far my quality of life has not been all that much affected. In fact, I eat more sensibly and I exercise more. I'm as politically active as ever, although I do prioritize more, which is a good thing for all women to learn. Most of all, I'm writing more and better than I ever have. So life is good, and this is just another issue to address. But one thing is certain, if we think we can solve half a disease for half the population, we all suffer. And now it's time for my first guest. Dr. Maria de Leon is a retired neurologist specializing in movement disorders, particularly Parkinson's disease. She has served with Parkinson's Disease Foundation's Advisory Council, and she is active in the Parkinson's Action Network, PAN. Moreover, she is the author of a wonderful book called Parkinson's Diva, which she is currently working on translating into Spanish, but which is available already in English. And she's not only an activist in all these areas, but she herself has been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Here is wonderful, smart, witty activist Maria de Leon. Maria, welcome to the program.
Thank you so very much, Robin, for having me here. I'm so delighted.
I've been looking forward to this. You are, of course, Dr. de Leon. You are a retired neurologist, and your specialty is movement disorders, in particular Parkinson's disease. And then, da-dum, as life would have it, you came down with Parkinson's disease some time ago, and you're a person living with Parkinson's and very, very active, both still as a scientist and as an activist in the Parkinson's community. And you've written an absolutely wonderful book. I want to start with that before I move on to anything else, which is woman specific. It's called Parkinson's Diva, D-I-V-A, A Woman's Guide to Parkinson's Disease, Maria de Leon, MD. And it is indeed a woman's guide to Parkinson's disease. It is funny. It is smart. It is medically accurate. What a concept. Everything and anything a woman would want to know about Parkinson's disease and about women having Parkinson's disease, which is, of course, very different from men having Parkinson's disease, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, I thought for the most part that, for years everybody's been talking about Parkinson's as one single disease. But it seems like, that, men and women are just not the same. So after I came down with the disease myself, I started realizing that, there's no literature, and looking back at my patients, that I thought if I can't practice medicine and do what I love, my passion of taking care of Parkinson's patients, then I can do something and try to at least change the view of how women are treated in medicine and how women present with Parkinson's disease, which is completely different than men. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, there's no information out there. So let's see if we can start a little path, a little guide to try to get people moving in that direction and thinking outside the box, if you will.
Well, you're an all-in-one because you come at it with a patient's perspective and a neurologist's perspective.
Listening to my patients all these years saying, I just don't feel well. I'm depressed, or, I have pain, but they're not really showing a lot of motor symptoms like my male patients were. So I thought something's got to be different. And certainly when I presented with the disease, I was completely atypical from the standard Parkinson's patient that you would see or you would think about. I was young, I was only 36, and I had a lot of pain, a lot of stiffness, and very little tremors. And at first, I experienced what most women experience, that, they kind of put you aside and say, well, you're probably just overworked, fatigued. Maybe there's something psychologically wrong with you. Go see a psychiatrist. It work. And I was like, what do you mean? And these were the people, my colleagues, who had referred patients to me, who had trusted me with their patients, with their lives, and now they were telling me that I was making this up, essentially.
My God.
And so that was, to me, very enlightening.
We know now about gender-specific medicine. I harp on this a lot because it is very important for men as well, because the male body and the female body really, really down to the cellular level are different. And if the male body is, as it has been, the model for all tests and trials and research, and male-centric research, as you call it, then where does that leave the other more than half the population? The book is still available. It's out there. It's, again, Parkinson's Diva, and you can find it online, and I'll give you the link for it as well. You can just go to www.parkinsonsdiva, no apostrophe, parkinsonsdiva.org. So you did the book, which has made a huge difference in people's lives. And then you also are the founder and the CEO of Defeat Parkinson's organization. Tell us about that.
Yes. Well, after I stopped working, much to my demise that I had to do that mostly because I was having so much trouble with the Parkinson's medication side effects, and also at the same time I had cancer. So yes, I had a double whammy. So that was the reason why I had to quit working.
My God, Maria! Wow. Okay, go on.
so I said, okay, I'm not, as every woman like you, and yourself, that is used to going 100 miles per hour and doing 20 million things at once. I could not conceive myself just sitting at home. I had a large Parkinson's population here. And over 1,000 patients. There's a big East Texas belt of Parkinson's. Mm-hmm. And now suddenly there was that need, and I said, well, I have to do something. So we formed this Defeat Parkinson's. So what we provide is free counseling and networking. I work with the doctors, my colleagues, and see the patients in a very laid-back, environment, and try to answer their questions, try to guide them in the direction. Mm-hmm. So sort of like a life coach for Parkinson's. We talk about finances and estate planning and medications, mm-hmm. and just, being overwhelmed with Parkinson's and so on, and referring them. And soon after that, I saw on the PDF had a...
It's Parkinson's disease. PDF is Parkinson's Disease Foundation. Go ahead.
Yes, and there was an opening. They were calling for people to become active as part of their people with Parkinson's committee to sort of guide the foundation as to the next step of what they should be concentrating on. So I thought, well, I'm really, even though I could still barely move and walk because I had just finished my chemo and I was completely feeling like a couch potato, and I was part of that for 4 years, which is enhanced my Defeat Parkinson's, because then I was able to bring that network in to East Texas and provide those materials and provide that support and link more people to advocacy and all. And of course, my thing has always been women. I've been a feminist since I was, a young girl. I used to say women do not need to get married. We're self-sufficient. And so my husband laughs about that because now I'm married and don't work, quote unquote. And so
raising kids and keeping a home is work. I got news for you.
Exactly.
But what a wonderful voice for women with PD you have turned this into. I mean, you're a member of AAUW, American Association of University Women, and in your role there, you talk with young girls and encourage their involvement in STEM, which is so necessary because the inherent even unconscious bias in science that doesn't include women in research, for example, women patients in research, would change, of course, the more women are doing the research. And I'm so grateful and glad and happy that you're part of the PDF Women's Initiative, Women in Parkinson's Initiative. And we'll have to get you back on the show to talk more about research and what's in the pipeline and all sorts of other good stuff. But for now, listeners, the websites are www.defeatparkinsons.com. And then you've got to get the book. So that's parkinsonsdiva.org. Thank you, Maria. And thank you as well for being a pal and for being with us today.
Thank you so very much, Robin. I love you to pieces, and thank you for all the work that you do.
It's time for a break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, but I'll be right back with Susan Foster, RN, to learn about what we can do maybe to make an impact on Big Pharma in terms of gender-specific research. Don't go away.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back. My next guest is Susan Foster, who, as a registered nurse, has more than 30 years of experience in clinical research, in sales training, and in marketing in the pharmaceutical industry, and now leads her own sales training company in that area. She is also a person with Parkinson's and a member of the leadership committee for the Parkinson's Disease Foundation Women and Parkinson's Initiative, and she was instrumental in starting the monthly Parkinson's Women Support Group in the Bay Area, which has now grown exponentially, which publishes a blog and has published a book on women and Parkinson's. You can find out more about them at www.parkinsonswomen, no apostrophe in Parkinson's, just parkinsonswomen.com. Here is Susan Foster. Susan, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Robin. It's great to be here.
Well, it's so good to have you here. Full disclosure, listeners, Susan Foster became a friend. I just fell in love with her and her energy and her commitment when we worked together in the leadership committee for the Parkinson's Disease Foundation Women and Parkinson's Initiative. And she's been very active, not only as a person with PD and a former registered nurse, but still is active in her own company and is very active in the issue of women and Parkinson's. Let's start with your group. You were instrumental in starting the monthly Parkinson's Women Support Group in the Bay Area, which now has more than 70 members? Is that what?
Yes.
Wow. How and why did that get going, and where is it now?
Well, when I first was diagnosed with Parkinson's, I went to the Parkinson's Institute in Sunnyvale, and my movement disorder specialist there, I talked to her about a support group, and she basically said that support groups are often discouraging for people who are newly diagnosed because often there are people who are very advanced. Mm-hmm. And she then had, with the support of a pharmaceutical company, had a party at the Institute and invited women from her practice and the other practices in the PI. And they kind of picked out the women that they knew were positive. Women with all stages of Parkinson's, but was more attitudinal. I think that she picked the women to invite. Mm-hmm. And at that party, I went around and gathered the emails of everybody who was in our local area, and emailed and started a monthly group. We initially had 5 people who came for the first few months, and it gradually grew to 10 and then 20. And now we typically have between 20 and 25 people at each meeting. But like I said, there's many more people on our email because we put out a lot of information as well that people are interested in, whether they're able to come to the meetings or not.
Amazing. Go ahead.
Our group is really, we don't purport to offer medical advice, but we do moral support, encouragement, and camaraderie for other women. And it's a unique environment because women, as you know, are often really the keepers of the culture and are the people who do the organization and planning, both in their families and very often in their communities. And when women have Parkinson's, it affects those family dynamics. And it can be very disruptive to the family system until people kind of come to some, arrangements about who's going to do what and so forth.
When people ask me, well, why is there a need for women's, gender-specific support groups, I know what I say, but I'd love to hear what you say.
Women have very unique needs. I think, we think there's some physiologic differences, but certainly there are personal and psychosocial things that women talk about and are probably more forthcoming often than men are. Mm-hmm. And those things can really only be discussed, I think, in a women's-only group. And our group has really become, so very close. I think we've formed such great personal friendships with each other that it's. And one person actually said she was glad she'd gotten Parkinson's because it gave her the opportunity to meet all these other wonderful women.
Oh,
that was the best possible spin you could put on having Parkinson's.
I was just going to say, yeah, actually, that's pretty damn good.
Yes.
Now, okay, in addition to your work with the group, and your work in your own company, you were a patient advocate for a Stanford University-affiliated stem cell research oversight committee. Talk just a little bit about that.
That was a group that they obviously were doing the oversight for stem cell programs that were going on at Stanford research groups, right, or research projects that were going on, and they wanted a patient advocate to read, through the protocols and be involved in the discussion, and that was very interesting because obviously, patients have a perspective about what is important in clinical studies and what people should look at in clinical studies. And I tried to provide that perspective. And I did have a background in clinical research from when I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, so it was kind of a natural fit for me.
It's so important that patients' voices be heard in those circumstances. This is a very important aspect of the work that Parkinson's Disease Foundation, I think, does in training people to be patient advocates. Susan, you mentioned pharmaceutical industry a moment ago, too, and because you have past experience with the industry, how can we get them to include women in gender-specific tests and trials? This is what first brought me to activism in terms of PD. Well, I'd been an activist, and then I got PD, so the two came together. Two came together, and I discovered, oh, hell, I can't even have a disease without a new constituency, because women have been left out of the tests and trials. And now, not only on this, but on much other research. So the National Institutes of Health finally, bless their hearts, have decreed that all of the research that they fund on this and every other disease has to be gender specific. And that is not only in the clinical trials with human beings, but in terms of male and female animals and down to the cellular level. This is really important because women are not just small men with different reproductive systems. We're really different. But that's still only 22% of research that NIH funds. And the rest, in terms of PD and so much else, is, of course, Big Pharma. Do you have any guidance for us on how we can make an impact on them?
I think that the lack of women, particularly in drug clinical trials, goes back to the fear of reproductive issues. And so typically women of reproductive age have always been excluded from early drug trials because they obviously didn't know what the effects could be on a fetus until they had gotten further down the testing line.
Right.
And I think it's much of a holdover from that. But certainly in Parkinson's, where the average age of diagnosis is 59 or so, that should not be an issue. And I think they need to really separate out those new drugs that are for diseases that are affecting older women and women where that is not an issue at all.
Right. And even for women for whom that would be an issue, let's say, excuse me, of reproductive age, what if they get Parkinson's? They're going to need to take those drugs anyway.
Right.
So then we don't even know until they become the de facto test subjects?
Well, I think they certainly can do some animal studies, and doing that in female animals will make a difference to be able to see. But I mean, I think that's always been the big concern in pharmaceutical companies about drug testing, and that's something that certainly has to be considered because it is an unknown often early on.
Right. How do we, let's say in terms of women who are not of reproductive childbearing age, how do we impact on them though? Would a letter campaign work? Do we need lobbyists? Do we need who do they listen to?
I think certainly the NIH guidelines are going to make a difference. The drug companies are going to realize, and also I think one thing we can do is be sure that women sign up for clinical studies.
Yes,
because there are many clinical studies that are open to women.
Yes,
and because there are more men with Parkinson's, I think just statistically often those studies end up having more men in them.
Right.
But I think that's certainly one thing that we can do on our end.
Well, and I think that's part of the Women in Parkinson's initiative, the PDF initiative that you and I are involved in, is to get the word out there. Yes,
and there needs to be more studies that look at are there differences in how drugs are absorbed and utilized in the body in women and men.
Precisely, yeah.
Because they certainly are finding that is true, certainly with some racial or ethnic groups, that there can be differences in drug metabolism in the body.
That's right, and we know that that's true in many cases with women.
And even the dosages of medicine. You know, if the trials are done mainly in men who tend to be bigger and heavier than women,
right,
you can come up with drug dosages that actually are too high for women.
That's right. And for that matter, all the men in Asia, because the norm is considered a Western male who is larger, taller, heavier, metabolizes differently than all the men in Asia and all the women everywhere else, everywhere in Asia and elsewhere. Anyway, we've got to go, but thank you, Susan, for all the work that you do, and thanks for being with us at Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you, Robin. It was delightful to talk to you.
And now it's time for the Surrealism Corner. Sometimes one's life and passions intersect in a surreal way, and this is one of them. Representative Marsha Blackburn, Republican of Tennessee, has opened House hearings to subpoena medical supply companies and laboratories in a search for the names of researchers, grad students, lab technicians, and administrative personnel, a witch hunt into who, at some of the nation's most prestigious universities and research centers, acquires and uses discarded fetal tissue for research. The scientific community fears that this endangers the lives of doctors and researchers, particularly given the surge in violence in 2015, according to the National Abortion Federation, against abortion providers in general and Planned Parenthood in particular. It follows on Planned Parenthood having been found completely innocent of any misdoings regarding fetal tissue. On the contrary, you'll remember, indictments were levied by the courts against those who tried to entrap Planned Parenthood and doctor the videos. But none of this deters Blackburn. Scientists point out that this intimidation can have a hugely chilling effect on research, shutting down studies seeking cures for Parkinson's disease, as well as for the Zika virus and other illnesses, and they note that vaccines for chickenpox, hepatitis A, polio, and rubella are all grown in cells derived from fetal tissue. Nevertheless, fetal tissue remains more valuable to the religious right than life already existing. By the way, Utah has decided to require anesthesia in some abortions because, against all scientific proof to the contrary, the legislature has decided that fetal tissue can feel pain. But in the good news fight back with some wit department, women have been infuriated by a new abortion law in Indiana, which, among other things, requires that miscarried or aborted fetuses and embryos be cremated or buried. These women have taken to tweeting and posting to the Republican Governor Mike Pence, that's P-E-N-C-E, and they tweet him at @GovPenceIn. That's at GovPencein for Indiana, with the hashtag #PeriodsForPence. And on Facebook, the page they set up is simply called Periods for Pence, P-E-N-C-E. Thousands of women are tweeting and posting messages to the governor and his Republican legislature, messages like, "Are heating pads or icy hot better for my uterine cramps?" Or, "What if my used tampon has cells from the lining of the womb? Shouldn't I give my tampon a decent burial?" Another invited Governor Pence to her gynecologist appointment. Let's do join in this storm of Twitter and Facebook posts. It's easy, it's fun, and it's a way of expressing our gratitude for right-wing concern and expertise, apparently, about our reproductive realities. It occurs to me that we should not leave out Congresswoman Blackburn. That's at Marsha Blackburn, MARSHABLACKBURN. Clearly, she could benefit from our tweets and posts as well. Surreal. Time for another brief pause here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I'm delighted to be returning in just a moment with Dr. Allison Willis, who has started the first national research project on women and PD. Stay with us.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back again. Dr. Allison Willis, my next guest, returns to the program. She was a guest on one of our previous Parkinson's and Women specials a few years ago. But since that time, she has not only been at her job as an assistant professor of neurology and a senior fellow at the Davis Institute and assistant professor of epidemiology and biostatistics at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine, but she has also, inspired by the Parkinson's Disease Foundation initiative on women and PD, inspired by that, she has conducted the first national research project on women and Parkinson's in terms of the epidemiology. It's a form, as she puts it, of personalized public health. It's historic, and she's here with us to talk about it. Dr. Allison Willis. Dr. Allison Willis, Allison, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be back.
I'm so glad that you're a recidivist, you're returning to us, especially since, although you were a guest before and talking about your research into Parkinson's, and we talked about women and PD, but now you have just initiated a remarkable, probably the first major study on women and PD. Tell us all about it. I'm so thrilled.
Oh, excellent. We are thrilled as well, in part because of the momentum and the energy that has begun with your program and the PDF. We have been able to put together what is probably the largest study of women with Parkinson's disease in the United States. And in order to do that, we have focused on the healthcare experience of women with Parkinson's disease. What happens after the diagnosis? And we've examined this in a way that has allowed us to get very large sample sizes, so it gives us trends over the whole country.
Oh, this is fabulous, because, I mean, among the things that we do know is that women can present differently. Women can present with different, not only is the disease a sort of boutique disease and everybody is affected differently by it, but there are real gender differences. And in an age of gender-specific medicine, this seems all the more important. So how did you actually come to do this study? I know you were flirting with it when we last talked, but you've pulled it off.
I was flirting with it, and I am fortunate to call on I'm fortunate to have colleagues around me who are interested and well-trained in this kind of research, and so working together, we've been able to pull it off. But you're absolutely correct. We have lots of data that shows us that women have different symptoms of the disease. Mm-hmm. They are more likely to have early stiffness or have muscle rigidity. They're more likely to have fatigue, constipation, and pain than men. And so there have been many small studies that have surveyed or examined or questioned small groups of individuals. And so we do know from those types of studies that women have specific symptoms. They're more likely to experience some symptoms and less likely to experience others. We also know that women are more likely to have motor fluctuations, and we know that they're less likely to get advanced care for Parkinson's disease. Those smaller studies, the individual level studies, tell us that women have higher ratings of feeling disabled from the disease, or they report a lower quality of life.
Yeah.
But this study is different. So instead of doing another study that recruited women from an academic medical center clinic and asking them questions about their symptom burden or how they responded to medications, this study used administrative data. So it used Medicare claims data. And the reason that's important is because administrative data can give you the opportunity to study a decline in health or a healthcare experience in ways that a clinic-based study can't.
Because it's a broader base?
It's broader based, and you can examine patterns of healthcare service use, like requiring wheelchairs earlier, using hospice more often, being in a nursing facility. And looking at health in that way not only can give you some clues about the symptoms that are occurring, but it can also show that one group is more susceptible to adverse outcomes, lack of social support. And so it can give you clues about health events that are not necessarily related to changes in the brain or in the cells, but instead indicate a suboptimal physical response, a suboptimal treatment response, or a suboptimal social support in response to the disease.
Right.
And improving survivorship, quality survivorship for PD, means that we need to look at all of these things, the whole package, because levodopa or a tablet cannot be the only answer.
Right, of course. So you're examining this, in a sense, partly almost from a public health perspective. I mean, not...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it is from a public health perspective. So if we really want to improve quality survivorship for everyone who has PD, we need to understand how different groups of people experience PD and how health and healthcare, how we treat people after they've been diagnosed with PD, changes.
Right.
I see this as the epidemiology complement of precision medicine. I think most of us who live in major cities are starting to see commercials where we are enthusiastically revealing how we can do genetic tests and blood tests and MRIs and pathology tests, and we can determine what the exact type of treatment for your condition is based on how you present at a cellular molecular level. This is the epidemiological complement of that. We are seeking to determine how to best shape your outcomes based on your healthcare experiences, how physicians interact with you, how likely you are to have quality care after a diagnosis, how much social support you will have with your diagnosis, with treatment, the barriers to quality care that you will experience, also because of who you are and how you present. So it's personalized public health, if you could think of it that way.
This is just absolutely stunning. It's wonderful. Is there a website for the initiative? Is there a place where people can contact you for more information?
You can contact me at the University of Pennsylvania Perelman School of Medicine in the Department of Neurology, or in the Parkinson's Disease and Movement Disorder Center. We are concluding this study. We will be submitting the results for publication very shortly. My partner, my sister in arms, Dr. Nabila Dadwala, who is a Parkinson's specialist and an epidemiologist like myself, interested in women's issues, we will be working together to bring the study results to the forefront.
Oh, well, brava. Thank you so much for this work. It just legitimizes the differences and ways to look at the differences in terms of gender-specific medicine and Parkinson's, and it's an extremely valuable contribution. Thank you again so much.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
And now it's time for our moment of celebration. We won this. Sometimes it feels like only the failures feel real, so it's important to celebrate every time we win one, and this is a big one. After years of initiatives by survivors of the sex exploitation industry and by the feminist movement, French lawmakers took a critical step to establish gender equality in France by adopting the so-called Nordic model on prostitution. On April 6th, 2016, this year, the French National Assembly recognized prostitution as one of the worst forms of violence against women and voted to criminalize the purchase of sex. Hallelujah. Under the law, prostituted women, children, and men will not be criminalized. On the contrary, they will receive social support and benefits to exit prostitution. And most importantly, pimps, brothel keepers, and johns, the buyers of sex, they will be prosecuted under the law. Buying sex will be fined and liable for further prosecution. This is absolutely a major step forward, and France now joins the growing list of countries who do not believe this is a groovy job that women should be glad to participate in, and on the contrary, who recognize the connections with huge amounts of sexual violence against women in the sex exploitation industry, prostitution, sexual assault, rape, physical, psychological torture, trafficking of women and children, and unless and until the demand side is addressed, the men who do the buying go scot-free. So this is one to really celebrate. Vive la France! Time for one last break here. I'm Robin Morgan. This is Women's Media Center Live, and I'll be back in just a moment or two with some fighting words.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back to some fighting words. The presidential election. Ah, yes. Well, consistent with the theme of this episode, former Wisconsin Governor Jim Doyle entered the political fray when he criticized Senator Bernie Sanders for Sanders' anti-scientific research vote on federal legislation in 2005 and for having co-sponsored similar legislation back when a member of the House of Representatives. According to Doyle, quote, had Senator Sanders won the day with his refusal to support and invest in stem cell research, Americans would have lost access to a new frontier of medicine that could one day cure fatal diseases, close quote. These were votes to ban all forms, including at the stem cell cellular level, of so-called human cloning. Possibly Senator Sanders didn't realize the potential consequences for research from his votes. In a recent session with the editorial board of the New York Daily News, for instance, whenever he was pressed to go beyond his vision and rhetoric, he seemed a bit lost. Example, Daily News on breaking up the banks. How do you go about it? Is it having legislation passed, Senator Sanders, or giving the authority to the Secretary of Treasury to determine under Dodd-Frank, or do you think the Fed has that authority? Sanders, well, I don't know if the Fed has it. Daily News, what we're asking is how can we understand? If you look at J.P. Morgan as an example, or Citibank, or Bank of America, what would that institution become? Would there be a consumer bank? Where would the investing go? Sanders, I'm not running J.P. Morgan Chase or Citibank. Needless to say, the Daily News was not happy with the responses, and not happy with the candidates' dyspeptic reactions to being asked for specific details, all of which you can find online. Poor Bernie. Not only did he have to walk back having said that Hillary was unqualified to be president, in what he thought was a tit-for-tat for something she actually had not said about him, but now he's campaigning in New York, making a point of emphasizing that he was born in Brooklyn. This comes as a profound shock to anyone who hears him talk. But he put his foot right in it when, in answer to a question about why he left New York for Vermont, he snapped, "I prefer the rural life." Oops! Do you realize how that strikes most New Yorkers? We who boast endlessly and odiously about the 24/7 nonstop urban energy of our city, most of us tending to agree with the late wit Dorothy Parker, who, when told by a friend he was going to the country, snarled, "Kick a tree for me." Being a gardener, I myself happen to love trees. That said, the New York primary is imminent, so I want to urge all my sister and brother New Yorkers hearing this to get out and vote for whomever grabs your enthusiasm. Speaking of which, something that maddeningly is not being reported at all, Hillary Clinton supporters are more enthusiastic than those of Senator Bernie Sanders, by 54% to 44%, a 10-point lead. You would never know that from the press, but that statistic is from a new Gallup poll based on Democratic and Democratic-leaning registered voters. And for those of you sliding into despair over the zealous enthusiasm of Trump supporters, take heart. The same poll shows enthusiasm for Hillary Clinton supporters about even with those of Trump. I guess because they don't march about like stormtroopers, they command less attention. If Trump secures the Republican nomination, he will start the general election campaign as the least popular candidate to represent either party since tracking began. 3/4 of women view him unfavorably, as do nearly 2/3 of independents, 80% of young adults, 85% of the Latina community, and nearly half of Republicans and Republican-leaning independents. These findings tallied from the Washington Post ABC News polling. 7 out of 10 women voters in recent polls say they have a negative impression of Trump. Of course, you and I might wonder, what in hell are the other 3 thinking? But that was before news coverage of Trump's cruel threat to spill the beans about Ted Cruz's wife's emotional problems, and before his talk about punishing women who have abortions. Maybe now the other 3 have come on board. Before that, though, the percentages of women who had an unfavorable or negative impression of Trump already were staggering. 67% on Fox News poll, even them. 67% Quinnipiac University poll, 70% NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, 73% CNN, and 74% ABC News Washington Post poll. Furthermore, Republican women are turning against Trump more and more as the race unfolds. White women who previously have voted Republican now view him with 68% unfavorables. Clinton, meanwhile, in head-to-head matchups, leads Trump by double digits. And Hillary shows massive leads among women voters, not surprisingly, up to 27-point lead in a CNN poll. It would appear that the gender gap is now expanding to include all people of color, all gay and lesbian people, all disabled and elderly people, independents, and most Republicans, and pretty much anyone who is not a sexist, racist, war-loving, immigrant-hating pale male. Way to go! No wonder the GOP elephant is chasing its tail with anxiety over what will happen in Cleveland. But don't forget, and don't let anyone else forget, that Senator Cruz and Governor Kasich, and for that matter, Speaker Paul Ryan, are all cut from the same political cloth as Trump, even if they drape it more gracefully. At least Trump is honest about embodying and articulating the tragedy of what a once great Republican Party and its politics have become. Get out there and vote, New Yorkers. And that's it for today. This program is syndicated, but if you can't find the broadcast on a radio station in your area, you can always visit us at WMClive.com. There you can find the show, plus the archive of all our previous episodes. And we're at iTunes worldwide. There you can stream, download, and subscribe to the show's podcast. Also, be sure to find WMC Live on Facebook and Twitter. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Opinions expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Regina K. Scully is our founding sponsor. Julie Burton, Women's Media Center President, is executive producer. And I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Don't forget to join us next week right here on Women's Media Center Live.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, tune your radio to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on WMClive.com. Talk radio with a brain.